This is Legislative Review on Prairie Public. I'm Dave Thompson. Thanks for joining us. Our guest is a return guest for our session. We have the House Majority Leader, Representative Al Carlson of Fargo. Thank you for being back.
That's good to be back, Dave.
And we said we were going to try to bring you back as we're getting down toward what is called the third period of the hockey game that is the legislative session.
You know, that it's not the Frozen Four, but it is in the final period of the hockey game.
It is. Before we get started on some of the budget issues, I'd just like to talk to you about the emotional thing that happened last week. Thursday, it was a long debate about the sexual orientation bill. Is that a dead issue now for the session?
I think it is. I think that everybody had their say. There wasn't really many people that had intention of changing their vote from the first day to the last day. And I think it's an issue that will be addressed again in the future. I've had in the last 3 of the last 4 sessions, we've addressed the issue. It's very emotional to both sides. And the House gave it a good hearing. We held the bill extra time, Dave, tried to see what we could work out. We weren't able to work out something that was acceptable, and the bill did not pass. And I believe that the issue is over for the session.
So there had been rumors floating around that maybe there would be an attempt to put some language in the OMB bill, the Office of Management and Budget bill. That will not happen.
Well, I would not support that. I think that the issue is over. We've had our debates. And then to try and come in through the back door and add some language in when people have already spoken is wrong.
Still getting a lot of emails on it, though?
Very few. And I tell you what, some of them are very harsh, and some of them are very complimentary. And it's been about a 50-50 split. And the only amazing thing to me is how crude some people can be in their attack because you didn't agree with them. You know, I don't believe that that's the right way to treat an issue that's asking for tolerance by being intolerant. Doesn't work so well for me.
So it could be a session from now.
I would say that we'll see that issue again. There was a lot of things in that bill. It wasn't just one word. You know, it wasn't just 2 words in a bill. There were a lot of issues in there. And I don't think it dealt with the ramifications very well. And it's just done. It's over with for this time.
Okay, since we've got that passed, would it be fair to say that the issue du jour, or the issue of the last part of the session, is money?
For the most part, we're down. Most of the major policy bills are passed. The House has the 2 biggest budgets in the place on our side. We have the Human Services budget and the K-12 funding bill. Between those 2, there's over $4 billion of general fund spending in them. I mean, they are the big gorillas in the pen, and they need a lot of work and a lot of looking at. And our guys have done their work. They're both ready to come out of committee. In fact, we'll see the Human Services budget maybe as early as tomorrow on the floor. That'll go to conference, so will the K-12 bill. And things are actually, those are 2 big issues at the end. We're still waiting for the bill that divides the money from the oil revenue into silos. We have not got that back yet. We do have the 70-30 formula bill back in the House. We're reviewing, analyzing the changes they made to it. They left the percentages the same, but they made some adjustments with the way the money is distributed. And we're trying to analyze that to see if it's fine to concur or not. And we'll make that decision in the next couple of days.
If you were a betting person right now, would you think it'll be a concur or another conference committee, perhaps?
You know, I think that if you don't know for sure, you should at least have one conference committee to get the explanation of why they did it. You know, we're not going to argue over the money because it pretty much came back to us the same amount of money. There is some differences in how they view hub cities and how they do some school funding. 2 issues that we want to make sure we're not messing up the formula for K-12, and one that which cities belong to receiving extra money from the formula. Those 2 things have to be resolved, I think. Is it big numbers? No, the numbers are basically the same. We're pleased that they accepted the 70-30. That means 70% of that formula goes to the state, 30% to the political subdivisions, and we like that. It's just a matter of we're arguing a little bit over how you distribute the non-oil county road money, whether it's on the county collector system or whether it's on the Upper Great Plains Institute needs study. And again, that's kind of semantics, but it does make a difference how it goes out and what roads get fixed.
Well, you mentioned 70-30. At one point, the Senate was going to push for a 60-40 split. It was 60% going to local governments. Then along came the revenue forecast, and the House stayed at 70-30. And in talking to the Senate leader, he said, well, I think we have to do that because of the current budget situation we're in.
Well, I tell you, when you look at the revenues from oil, And I think the tip of the iceberg is what we've seen. I think there's a long tail to what's going to happen with businesses out west because the price continues to decline. There's a lot of optimism. A couple days ago, it was up to $53. Yesterday, it dropped $3.50 a barrel. So I think that there is we're only 50 days today away from the big trigger hitting, which means taking that tax down from 6.5 to 0. And that has a huge effect on our budget. When we anticipated over $8 billion of the revenue with the governor's initial December forecast and budget, to the stage where today, if this extended beyond the 10 months that we predict the trigger would be on, we're looking at between 2.3 and 3.3 billion dollars of revenue, $5 to $6 billion less revenue than we anticipated when we started.
You're talking really huge numbers, and this. I go back to when I started in covering the legislature, and we weren't even talking $1 billion at that.
I remember the first time I voted on $1 billion budget for human services, and that was with the federal money included. And there's a lot of federal money in that budget. Now we're talking, over $3 billion with the federal money in it on that very same budget. And I don't know about you, Dave, but we deal with these numbers every day, and I can't imagine what $1 billion would look like. That is a lot of money.
It is a lot of money. Speaking of a lot of money, one of the other budgets that's still out there and not settled yet, of course, is higher education. And I think the House took out just about every building except for the project at the UND Medical School. Am I correct in that?
We did. And we made that commitment to them last time. They're in the middle of building it. You can't build half a building. So there's about $64 million that we have to continue to build and to finish. And they've spent a lot of that already. The progress is moving along at a great pace. So that money will be paid, will be kept, and that's part of the budget.
Yeah, the Senate seems to be putting some buildings maybe back in. At least that's what we're hearing.
Well, we've seen it. We have not seen the official bill because the work isn't all done on it yet. But they have some things that are on that list, and obviously that's going to be a point of discussion when we go to conference committee. They've changed the formula. They've kind of had some hold harmless things they're working on, and we're going to scrutinize that one carefully.
One thing that did pass, considering higher education, surprised a few people, was the idea of taking the auditors away from the campuses and putting them under the auditor's office.
Well, and that was controversial. Attorneys are another part of that. We've concurred. The Senate concurred with the auditor's bill, so that's gone. That one's done. The Attorney General's bill is still out there, and I believe that the right thing to do is to move those attorneys under his control, like we do with almost all of our other state agencies. So there's some concern there. There's still some concern on handling how you handle internal auditors. Where should they be and what should be their function, because that really is not a function of the auditor's office. So that was pretty well handled as far as contractual arrangements and stuff. So we think we got that budget in. We thought as we left the House, we had it in pretty good shape. That's what conference committees are all about, is to sit down and iron out the differences. One thing I want to talk about when it comes to the budget, a lot of concern about the shortage of revenue, but because we planned ahead, we were able to fund. There's going to be $730 million in this budget for property tax relief, plus an additional 12% that comes directly off your statement. The first money goes into the K-12 funding, and it puts a mill top on their mills at 60 mills, and the other one is a 12% direct payment. That was because we set the money aside. We had $1 billion for infrastructure in the surge bill, that if we hadn't filled those buckets, we wouldn't do it. The concern will be the next time. But in relation to that on the budget, with everything said and done, the money has changed quite a bit since we started. We're still up over 12% on the overall budget. I cannot find an agency that got less than they got last time. So when people say that, boy, you just cut everything, all we did was we reduced the increases. And you've got to keep that in mind. There's still people in my caucus that think we're spending too much money. That we should cut it back, because there's 230 new people added in this budget. Instead of 330, there's 230.
230.
And I think that's too many, but it's really hard to pull those out, and we will not pull them out when it comes to public safety. We understand that those things having to do with the increased activity need to be handled, whether it be in law enforcement, whether it be in regulatory at the Industrial Commission, whether it be at the prisons, or whether it be in the health department for regulators. we're going to make a commitment to those because they need to be done. We need to protect that the things are being out there done by business are being done right.
So that's an amazing number to me. 230 new positions.
Well, that's usually, it means forever.
And you said most of them are public safety?
Quite a few of them, most of them are. We've really identified it, unless there's a drastic need. I mean, there was obviously a cry for a lot more judges. We did not go with all those judges, and that's yet to be resolved. There was a whole bunch of new people added, 25 new people in the Attorney General's office. They're still working on what that final number will be. But those kind of things where we really need to make sure that public safety is involved. We need to make sure we don't shortchange that.
Since you mentioned public safety, I just have to ask about the Missouri River Correctional Center. What's the status of that?
Well, our position in the House, and at this point in time, there's no money in for a building down at that site. We still firmly believe that that should be moved to another site. It shouldn't be down where it's at, and that site should be redirected for the public to use as part of it being a park, and maybe finding another use for the buildings that are usable. There's some problem with some of the buildings down there. We're having a hard time thinking we should be rebuilding down there when we think it should move.
And if you had your druthers, where would you move it?
Well, the original drawings did show it to be on the same site as the existing pen, but outside the fence, because they are a different level of security for those prisoners. Those are very minimum security prisoners, and but yet they're fairly close to residential neighborhoods where they're at. And I just don't think it's the right place to build onto that. Some of those buildings don't fit us the best, but they might have another purpose that we can use. There's people who want law enforcement training academies. There's park buildings and functions. We'll find another use for it, and we'll turn it to good for a great site for the people down there.
Would it be the Youth Correctional Center in Mandan as one possibility, or maybe the James River Correctional Center?
Well,
in
both of those
Jamestown?
have been on the list, that they could be possibilities. I prefer the site at the existing where we just redid a bunch of that. Unfortunately, the bad thing about building new prisons is if you build it, they will come. And we have proven that, because what we thought would last a number of years is already full.
It's amazing, though, and it came at the time when the population just exploded, especially in the West.
Yep, and because of that, it brought some things with it and our change in DUI laws that we did last time added more people than we thought it would add. And there's controversy as to whether the county should be keeping prisoners or the state should have them, and those things just have been pretty well worked out for this time. But we need to keep addressing. There's new prisons, 4 of them being built in the counties coming online, which should help as well along the line of relieving some of this. And hopefully we can all get along and contract some of these state prisoners back into these county jails.
The ones that are being built, like the ones in Burlington County.
Absolutely. And there's territorial issues that come along with everything we do.
You're not, though, kicking the can necessarily down the road at this point.
Well, we're not kicking it down we're kicking it down the road in the essence that we're not going to do anything. But the financial side of it is what's keeping us from doing anything.
It's not that it's not a voluntary type thing.
If I had my druthers, we'd be building it, but there's just not the funds to do all those things this time.
And you mentioned the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court building probably won't happen.
That is not back on the drawing board. I think I'm personally in favor of redoing that historic building on site. It looks to me like a place where the court should be. But you'd also have to build something onto that as well. To have the adequate size for that. It would free up some space in the Capitol, but the timing and the money just don't work.
What about the governor's residence? That seems to be surfacing again.
That thing comes up every day, just like a bad penny. It turns up, but there's a lot of people that think we should build it. We have the money set aside. There's oil wells and things that have been used in the Capitol building grounds. The revenues off them. There's over $6 million, I believe, in that fund right now. That house does have some significant problems. There's some mold issues. There's some space issues. There's really no place to entertain any state guests that came to our state as far as having functions and things there. And we think it's time that we have a house that looks like North Dakota and is a welcoming site for all the people that come and do business in our state.
So is it a yes or no? Is that going to happen now?
Well, the vote, I believe it'll probably come out of appropriations with a do not pass. But I think there's sentiment on the House floor to pass it. The Senate seems to be, of course, they were, a couple people over there were the driving factor behind it more than we were. I know I've seen some final amendments. They're going to try and deal with it down in appropriations, and I'm hoping they get it handled.
I have to ask at this point, how do you keep all these pieces of the puzzle together at this point.
Well, remember I told you about the balloons? Well, they're all in the air. But you know what? Experience tells you that you have to prioritize. And right now we're prioritizing making sure that the numbers match. So when I look at, as a leader, my responsibility is to look at the big picture and make sure that at the end of the day that we have a budget that balances and that we have an ending fund balance that would handle us in some pretty volatile times in the economy. And that's been the biggest struggle of this session. And now in the next 2 weeks, we're going to have to reconcile the books. We're going to have to make some hard decisions and prioritize some things, and we're going to get out of here.
Now, you mentioned the next 2 weeks. That would take you to day 75.
We're hoping on the 24th yet.
And that'll give you the 5 days.
Yeah, they'll give us the 5 days. You know, if we don't get them, I prefer to get them. But if we don't, there's a simple responsibility we have, and that's to do good work. And it's not to see if we can get out faster because we need some extra days. The governor can always call us back. But our job is to be efficient, to not argue over things that make no sense, to find resolution of all these key issues. And I think we're doing a good job of that, Dave. We're communicating every day with the Senate and with the leadership and the appropriators, and we're working towards a common goal. We might have a little difference sometimes how we get there, but we're both, the majority party controls both sides as Republican. It's our responsibility, you know, not to throw hand grenades at each other, but to try and find resolution of the issues.
And it seems like it's a little calmer now.
Well, I think, like anything, you learn over time. I think that I've taken that approach, and I think it's a reasoned. Yeah, if you have a reason to do something, have a reason to do it. Don't just because you want to say no. You know, if it either fits or doesn't fit. Good public policy. Representative Dorso always preached for years that we have a simple role, and that's create good public policy. You know, that should be our guide as we go through. Balance the books and create reasonable public policy.
And of course, somebody who predated Dorso by the name of Earl Strinnen talked about the policymaking branch of government.
Oh, you bet. He was, and we're always, it's our role, there's only one branch of government that can spend money or make policy, and that's us. And that's our responsibility to do it right.
Going back to what you are looking at as a adequate ending fund balance, what would that be?
We believe that you can't leave with anything less than $200 million. So our goal on both sides has been $200 million. Now, we still think that when we redid the forecast in March, I had a real disagreement over the sales tax numbers because I believe they've grossly overestimated the effect that the declining oil production and the number of rigs that are drilling, the effect they'll have on the sales tax revenues and income tax. But because they wanted to, the governor felt that we were a little too low, we accepted his numbers, but then we boosted our ending fund balance from $100 million to $200 million to offset that, and he agreed with us. Because it's a crystal ball on revenue, but we've gone from 188 rigs to 94 rigs drilling today, and they're still laying rigs on the ground. And there's people still being laid off up there. And instead of fracking 130 wells a month, we did 45 last month. So they're not fracking because the expensive part in the end is the fracking. So you can't blame them. I mean, they're managing cash out in the oil patch, and our responsibility, we view it completely different, obviously, Dave. We're worried about protecting state revenue. They're trying to protect their businesses. You know, so there's a whole different view of how you look at this oil price thing.
Yet it's interesting when the big trigger goes on and the tax rate goes down, that might spur on some fracking, and some wells that are waiting to be completed might get completed because maybe it makes more financial sense at that point.
You know, it could. And again, the best months of that well is those first few months after they frack them. And do they want to spud those wells? And do they want to sell that oil at 35 or 40 bucks, or do they want to wait? I think they'll finish enough wells to make sure their cash flow is managed. And I'm not an oil guy, but I can tell you if I was a businessman, I'd think long and hard about doing a whole lot of them, because I don't think the 5% or the 6.5% that they save on the tax is enough to offset the low price in the shipping.
So at this point, that bears watching, though. And
we have a daily watch. We write down the oil price every day. You've been in my office. Every day we write it down. And some days there's happy faces and some days there's long faces. But I want to tell you that in 3.5 months, 3 1/3 months, we have not exceeded the target price that we need to have the trigger not kick in. And it's the monthly average. It's not just one day. It could go to 55.10 tomorrow. and it wouldn't be good enough because it'd have to be above that on the average for all 30 days of the month.
Is this something that's going to be revisited maybe 2 years down the road, the idea of a small trigger and a large trigger, and do something with tax policy?
Well, I tell you what, I think that the day is coming where you have to look at tax policy. It's a touchy issue. It's a political issue. But from a management of the, point of view, from the state's revenue, there's nothing harder to manage than wondering and guessing what's going to happen to the revenue along the way because of the triggers. And if you're looking at them, you should look at all of them. You get people running for the back room and hoping nobody talks about it when you bring it up. But the reality is, at some point in time, we're going to have to talk about it.
Since we have only a couple weeks left in the session, at this point, what would you think is the greatest triumph that you've seen in the session?
I would say that from my perspective as a leader, I think the fact that we've got engaged a lot more in looking at the revenue projections and making sure that we were working off of numbers that we were comfortable with, and the fact that the governor's office and the Senate bought into the fact that we worked on that, to me, is a real accomplishment, because it is our job to not only just take the budgets and see what we can do to them, it's to understand the whole picture of how you generate your revenue. There's a lot of successes, I think, that we've done in terms of when you look at educational funding. I think that we as a state have stepped forward since I've been there. Now we're over 82% of the cost of education is state funded. I think that's a great accomplishment. I think our business-friendly environment, we keep working on that. If you look at all the bills, you'll see that North Dakota continues to be a great place to do business. And I think that's important because that's what drives our economy, is the business environment. And I think you look at there isn't just one instance, but there's a conglomeration of things that make people want to live here and do business here.
Any major surprises?
Oh, I don't know that I would call them any surprises. Probably no. I really don't. I just anticipate a day at a time that we balance the books, that we make sure that we don't overregulate. You know, it's a philosophy of my party, and it's a philosophy of mine, that the best government is the government that isn't real intrusive, but yet requires everybody to be responsible as they do business here. And it's a big picture. I mean, there's 940 bills that we had. And some went by the wayside, some made it better. Not to overregulate our citizens, to make sure their freedoms are guaranteed. It's hard to put just a finger on one thing and say this was the best thing we did. There's a lot of good accomplishments that have happened along the way.
Any disappointments?
No, I don't have a lot of disappointments. I've been really pleased how we've kind of stuck together. We've had disagreements on the floor of the House with the minority party. But let me tell you, they've been very polite. They've been very reasoned in their thought. We just didn't philosophically agree with them. So from my standpoint, being able to work with them and not be adversarial with them on every issue we do is important to me. And I have a great deal of respect for the leadership over there. They're gentlemen. They're good guys to work with. And that's the way it should be. Do I expect them to agree with everything we do? You know, if we have a press conference and they have a press conference, we haven't attacked each other. We've had disagreements in philosophy. And that's the good thing about North Dakota. And I'm proud of that, the way we do our business there. Now, do they like that they don't win a lot of the battles? You know, I would guess they probably don't. But do we have reasons for what we do? I would like to think we could always defend our actions.
Now I have to ask something from your perspective. That apparently earlier that you had told a talk show host that you're going to serve out your term and then think about retiring.
I never told him that, but he never. I'm going to stay as long as the people allow me to stay. I like the job that I do. I'm hoping that my caucus sees it that way, that they let me be the leader again next. But I have a 4-year term. I'm hoping they allow me to sit in that office again and help direct the ship. That I hope they think I'm fair and reasoned in how we get things done. I think there's a lot of accomplishments that our caucus can look at. So I have no intention today of taking a walk.
Okay, so you think it's 2 years from now, it's going to be another challenging session, perhaps?
You know, it could be. The problem, and Representative Delzer and I agree that this session is not the concern because we would put the money aside. But how do you continue next session if the revenues have a sharp decline? And we have elevated our level of spending to a pretty high level on the general fund side. And you got to remember, that's the side that every day you got to have that money to run all the programs and turn the lights on in every building and play the people. So we've got to be very careful. I think it's going to be challenging because the revenue could be significantly different than we think it's going to be.
And depending on what oil does, depending on if we get a major turnaround or don't get a major turnaround.
You know, oil is the wild card, but I think that one thing, Dave, that everybody's forgotten to talk about is the effect on the ag economy.
Yes.
Because there are some pretty low commodity prices out there, and the input prices haven't changed a lot for these guys. I mean, I think there's a lot of implement dealers. I think there's a lot of farmers sitting back wondering about the line of credit that they maybe didn't get to pay fully off after last year's low prices. How are they going to handle that? And what effect does that have on the overall revenue of the state? I think it's a hard number to measure, but the backbone of this state has always been ag.
Yep.
And I think we've underestimated that. That's why I've been extremely cautious about these income tax and sales tax numbers, because I think we haven't taken enough into account what could happen there.
All right. Well, thank you again for your return visit.
I'm
Appreciate
glad
it
you
so
did.
much.
It's always fun to come in here, Dave. We're going to wrap up in the next 2-3 weeks a very successful session for the citizens of North Dakota.
Excellent. Our guest today on the program, House Majority Leader Al Carlson, Republican from Fargo. For Prairie Public, I'm Dave Thompson.